Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. Lawyer Olivia Taylor was one of the first to meet with Douglas Chappell. She was introduced by the head of the administrative offices of GE Schenectady. At the first glance at the tall, very handsome manager, Olivia felt an interpersonal attraction that she had to suppress with all her professional self-control. After all, she would have to work with him, and she was not the kind of woman who admired a man or openly flirted with him. Douglas Chappell was the new head of the real estate tax department at GE Schenectady. Olivia was a senior associate attorney in the corporate lawyer's office. The real estate group was a separate but related GE Schenectady office. Doug wasn't Olivia's boss, and he wasn't above her in the corporate structure. However, he was a rising star, clearly destined for a speedy promotion. He was also amazingly handsome and possessed that unique set of personal qualities that are defined as charisma. His arrival caused a shock among the female staff of GE Schenectady, from women in manufacturing enterprises to women in executive offices. The legal department was mainly staffed by women, both at the office and professional levels, and this had a particularly strong impact. At first, Olivia ignored the whispers and speculation among her female colleagues. It wasn't that it didn't concern her, it was just that she didn't allow herself to go down that path. As rumors spread about Doug's ability to work in the bedroom and his extraordinary dignity, she became more and more interested, despite her determination not to do so. She watched as her female colleagues, and even her own secretary Julie Stevenson, shamelessly flirted with Doug Chappell, but Olivia resisted such stupid female behavior. After all, she's a lawyer, and she's married. She has advanced enough in her career to purchase a nice colonial-style house in Del Mar, near the elementary school. It was a prelude to having children, which she and her husband David discussed. In her typical manner, Olivia has set aside a decent amount in case of children. She was a planner and carefully prepared for each of the specific stages of her life. To some, her marriage to David after graduating from college and before going to law school might seem hasty, but in fact it was part of an elaborate strategy. While she was in law school, David began teaching physics in high school, putting aside his career ambition to become a marine biologist. He imagined himself living on a yacht in a more southern climate. It was the kind of romantic dream David was prone to, and pretty much what attracted him to his more practical wife. As their family life showed, David enjoyed teaching, and in the last 2 years he returned to graduate school in the evenings and in the summer. However, with 2 incomes, the couple were well prepared to become parents. David's dream will remain a dream washed ashore in the upper Hudson River. Their dog, Buster, appeared as the only surprise in Olivia's orderly existence. Buster was from the orphanage. Olivia's husband, David, took his class on a school trip to an animal shelter. At the shelter, David found a small, unhappy puppy that looked too ugly to be easily adopted. But David, being a romantic, fell under the spell of 2 big brown eyes. He ignored the clumsy and ugly face of a cross between an Irish wolfhound and a street Bernard and brought the newly minted Buster home to introduce Olivia. At first glance, she was dubious about such a replenishment in their small family, but it seemed like a small compensation for the loss of a big dream. The puppy grew into a monstrously large, ugly dog that frightened the guests, but only for a moment. Buster was an affectionate giant whose only threat was that he could lick you to death. Olivia realized that she loved this huge beast almost as much as she loved her husband. They were 2 big and cute creatures that looked strange and ferocious, but inside they were loving and beautiful. Olivia had a house, a dog, and a happy, contented marriage with the promise of future children. At least, that was the case until Doug Chappell began to pursue her. She was just his type, a beautiful girl turned into an even more beautiful woman. She had not yet lost the shyness and trepidation of her youth, and there was still the innocence in her appearance that was so attractive to a young wife. But most of all, she shunned him. For a man who enjoyed easy success with women, the ones he had to achieve were always more desirable. When Doug walked into Olivia's office one afternoon, he said, "We need to do something about these triple-priced rentals in the city of Colony." He moved around Olivia's desk until he stopped, almost touching her. He leaned on the back of her chair with one hand, and with the other pointed to a spreadsheet that he had unfolded on the desktop of her computer. GE's real estate department had significant experience in successfully fighting property taxes. However, the city of Colony was a formidable opponent. The city saw significant commercial expansion beginning in the 1960s, and it actively defended its taxes. "What do you suggest?" Olivia asked Doug. At these words, she turned in her chair, almost between his arms. She was close enough to feel the warmth of his body and felt his almost magnetic pull. "I thought that since, according to the lease agreement, we have the rights of the owners, we will file a claim for the valuation of the property." "Everything?" He looked her straight in the eye as he answered, "Yes, of course. I don't like to leave anything unfinished." She sensed that he wasn't just talking about rent. "This is a big deal. You'll see, there's a strong defense there. I believe that a vigorous attack can always overcome the defense." Olivia started working on tax cases with Doug. He hired independent appraisers and conducted an initial tax protest, and Olivia began to prepare petitions in the case of in Remington. In rem, in Latin, means against property, which in this case means real estate. No lawsuit against the defendant, just a request to the court to reconsider the assessment. The city did not change its estimate, which was almost everywhere the standard 150% of the cost, and not the real cost, as required by law. However, Olivia had to do a lot of work to prepare these cases for trial. Doug kept this job under personal control, which required him to communicate a lot with Olivia. He was not joking, seriously attacking both in tax matters and in Olivia's resistance to his advances. She fought with all her might, although she wanted nothing more than to capitulate at his first attack. She was a normal woman with all the desires a woman could have, but her own inexperience was added to her problems. In terms of betting, Olivia didn't know any men except her husband. He was her first, just as she was his first. Her plans were to remain faithful to each other until death separated them, but she couldn't help but wonder what the other man would be like. She had no doubt that Doug was extraordinary in bed. There were several women in her own office who allegedly warmed his sheets, including Olivia's secretary, Julie, who had a 2-month affair with Doug. Julie bragged about her adventures with him and stopped contacting him only when her husband began to suspect something. Julie's husband was not a patient or understanding man. Olivia is not Julie, and although Olivia's husband, David, was not jealous, his trust and unconditional love did not allow Olivia to betray him. She wasn't a cheater. Olivia would not have acted behind her husband's back, but it was difficult to resist Doug, and deep down she realized that she did not want to resist. It's not like David was a wimp in the bedroom, but he was ordinary. Above average height, below average appearance, and average talent where it mattered. If you judge men by their character, David was a prince. He was definitely Olivia's prince, and she knew it from the first time they met, when they sat next to each other in their first year of biology. They just suited each other in many ways. She loved David, but there was something about Doug that made him irresistible. True to his word, Doug resolutely went on the offensive. He was flirting shamelessly. He praised her hairstyle, shoes, dress, all the jewelry and costume jewelry that she wore. If she were honest with herself, Olivia would admit that almost from the first time Doug appeared in the GE office, she began to dress differently. She stopped wearing trousers to work. The striped jackets from her lawyer's suit were complemented by skirts that got shorter and shorter each time. Everything about Olivia began to change, starting with the way she styled her hair, down, not up, and the smell, Chanel, not Guerlain, and ending with the lace tops of stockings that replaced her tights. Outwardly, Olivia, a lawyer wrapped in a corset of external decency, resisted, but the sensual woman inside her made her way out. Doug Chappell knew how to cut women's corsets. He offered to arrange a working lunch, but off campus, where they could work without interference and have a drink after lunch. "Just one," he said. "You deserve it." Drinking would have led to a late return home. At first, David was waiting for her at home with Buster, but when summer turned into autumn, David was often not at home. He said he was working on his boat. During his first summer of teaching, he purchased a small sunfish boat and learned how to sail on Lake George. Eventually, during his summer vacation, David began working at the Albany Yacht Club, earning slightly more than the minimum wage. Olivia believed that it helped him realize at least some part of his dream. This replenished the funds they were saving for children, a kind of children's fund. Olivia couldn't mind that David wasn't at home, since she stayed so often, but was Buster always there to meet her with a questioning or accusing look? Whether Buster knew about her inner conflict and how dangerously she was going to the edge, he could not say. If David suspected, he pretended not to notice. Things were clearly heading for a crescendo when the long New York winter set in with an October ice storm. David had what he would call a non-working day. It wasn't that he hated teaching. In fact, he liked this activity. This is a much more difficult profession than people think. There is a lot of politics with a small p in it. You have to listen to the nonsense that school administrators carry and then figure out how to do the job in spite of it. We have to deal with the machinations of fellow teachers, listen to their complaints, and avoid getting involved in their personal lives and professional resentments. And then there are the parents, either too involved in the lives of their children or too indifferent, because there is never a golden mean. Finally, the work itself. In the 9th grade, David taught 3 general physics classes, an average of 26 people per class, with a total of 78 students. Year after year, they passed through his class, not understanding the physical world around them and caring only about who they were meeting, what their favorite pop star or rapper was doing, and most of all about how they looked and how their fellow 9th graders perceived them. He would be the first to admit that it is easier for him than for teachers of English, mathematics, or, God forbid, social studies. Physics was a subject that could attract the attention of students, especially if you make a small explosion at the beginning of the lesson. It is easy to attract their attention, it is more difficult to keep it, and in this sense he had the most difficult job, to find a way to convey the rules of the universe to the future builders and shapers of our society. He understood how dangerous ignorance of physics can be for society. His responsibilities were complicated by administrators, parents, politicians, religious leaders, and a blatantly ignorant society that viewed his work as simply preparing students to take a series of standardized tests designed by fools for the ignorant. David had a job that could easily be hated, but which he accepted with joy. However, he reached the point where he began to fear the future associated with the classroom. He longed for his lost dreams and, when the weather allowed, sailed his small boat on the cold Hudson River. Unfortunately, the weather was terrible that October day. The overlapping layers of cold and moisture in the atmosphere brought neither rain nor snow, but covered roads, trees, and power lines with a layer of ice. By noon, schools and most businesses were closed due to the emergency announcement. He knew that Olivia's Audi was not suitable for such weather. "So I want to pick up my wife in my old Ford diesel pickup truck." Her Audi could have stayed overnight in the company's parking lot, and he would have driven her safely home and back to work the next day. David arrived at the GE campus in Schenectady in the middle of the day. He expected that he would have to get Olivia out of the office ahead of time, but found that most of the GE territory was already empty and was surprised to see Olivia walking from her building. However, she was not alone. A tall guy was walking next to her, holding an umbrella in one hand, and his other arm was wrapped around Olivia's waist. The way they moved together spoke of familiarity and a relationship that was more than 2 colleagues sharing the same umbrella. There are times when you observe how a student has difficulty learning a subject. He does the work, but the meaning of the lesson escapes him. At one point, he is experiencing difficulties and is in the dark, and suddenly his eyes light up and he understands what is the matter. Perhaps it was because of something that you demonstrated or said, but more often than not, the insight just comes by itself. The moment when all the disparate threads come together and understanding comes. David had such a moment, but the teacher was not him, but his wife Olivia. Crossing the icy sidewalk, Olivia leaned against the strange man she was walking with, resting her head on his chest and hugging him tightly. Perhaps it was the prudent act of a woman trying to avoid falling, but her actions were too familiar. There was no hesitation. She, a married woman, snuggles up to a man who is not her husband, but does not show awkwardness or anxiety. At that moment, David understood the meaning of all the little signs that he had seen, but had not realized until that moment. The way she dressed for work, the incomprehensible absent-mindedness she had been showing at home for several months, and the fact that she was seriously and constantly late for home. It should have been obvious earlier, but he didn't suspect anything. He was naive and blinded by love. His first impulse was to leave, but he wasn't like that. He turned his truck around and smoothly pressed down on the gas pedal, as a result of which his truck ended up between a couple under an umbrella and the entrance to the parking lot. Olivia and Doug looked up as the truck stopped, blocking their path. Doug looked like he was going to yell at David, but before he could, David rolled down the window and leaned out. "I thought I'd give my wife a ride home," David said. He saw that the man holding the umbrella had swallowed all the words he was going to say. Olivia just stood there, frozen with her mouth open. David leaned out of the truck window into the freezing rain. He looked into his wife's eyes and said, "Get in." There was a threatening note in his voice. Olivia pulled away from Doug and walked around the truck to open the passenger door and climb inside. While she was doing this, David stared intently at Doug, who was trying to smile back. When Olivia was in the car, David nodded to the man holding the umbrella and turned the truck into traffic mode. It usually took about 30 minutes to get to their house in Delmar, but the weather delayed the trip by more than an hour. It seemed much longer to the occupants of the truck cabin. They drove in silence until they turned onto a bypass road in the city of Bethlehem. A few moments away from the house, David pointed at the hive. "Were you ever going to tell me about him?" David asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Olivia was looking out the passenger window and didn't turn to look at him. She thought about denying everything, but then decided that there was nothing to deny. "No, because there's nothing to tell," she said. "Doug is my colleague. I like him, and he likes me." "Do you communicate with all your work friends as closely?" "No, of course not," Olivia said, and paused for a moment before continuing. "Doug is something special to me. We are close in something more than a simple friendship." As his Ford turned onto Delaware Avenue, heading toward Delmar Place and their small 3-bedroom colonial house, David considered his wife's statement. "How far has this friendship with Mr. Umbrella gone?" "His name is Douglas Chappell. He works in the real estate department." "So he's just a colleague," David said, pronouncing the words with such sarcasm in his voice that it was clear that he didn't believe in them. By this time, they had already reached the driveway and the side door of their house. Without responding to David's accusations, Olivia jumped out of the car and rushed into the house. David drove the truck into the garage before going inside. By the time he entered through the kitchen door, Olivia was upstairs in the master bedroom. Right outside the kitchen door, Buster was waiting for his walk. Despite the inclement weather, the man and his dog went outside. They were walking towards the elementary school and its open playing fields, empty in the icy rain. Buster wasn't bothered by the weather. He seemed like an animal created for testing. By the time they returned, they were both soaked through. They went down through a side door to the basement, where David threw his wet clothes into the laundry and took clean ones out of the dryer. Buster dusted himself off to dry off, but David helped him with an old beach towel stored in the basement for this purpose. When they went back up to the kitchen, they found Olivia waiting for them in a terry cloth robe and sitting at the kitchen table with an open bottle of wine. "We need to talk," she announced, pouring wine into 2 glasses. David took a seat at the table, but did not sit across from her. He sat down at the end, so that she had to turn around to look at him. It also allowed him to turn around so that she couldn't look him straight in the eye. Olivia's tone was affectionate but unyielding. "I want you to know that I love you and am very happy in our marriage," she began. "But although there was nothing romantic with Doug, we can say that we are strongly attracted to each other." "What's that supposed to mean?" David felt his anger rising. It wasn't just jealousy that was bothering him. There was a deep resentment in him and a feeling that he had been betrayed. Olivia was his only love. In truth, it was his first and only relationship. She was his first girlfriend, and with her he found a sense of satisfaction and togetherness that filled a void in his life. She spoke again, and something in the careful way she phrased her words reminded him that his wife was a lawyer, a loving and caring woman, but whose profession is to choose the words to achieve a goal. "It means that we have a strong marriage, and I am completely devoted to it," Olivia said. "I love you, but no more than you are able to control your every desire. I am a woman with all the physical limitations of my gender. We can't do anything about who we're attracted to. I didn't know any other man besides you. The fact that Doug seduces me is a fact. I can't deny it. And," he said, "because there is something more, so say it." She sighed. "It's not easy. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I need to get Doug Chappell out of my head. It's too hard to work with him every day and not know what it might be like. It looks like what? He clarified. You're the only man I've ever been in bed with. It should be impressive. I can't help but be curious, and he made it clear to me that he wants me. But I didn't even kiss him, and I won't, unless… She let the last word hang in the air, but David turned away while she was talking, and with her last words stood up and said, "We need to feed Buster." Olivia dropped the question. She was caught between the love she felt for her husband and the desire she felt as a woman. 3 weeks have passed since the ice storm. The weather has changed, and an unusually warm November has arrived. It seemed that the weather was becoming more unpredictable every year. Hurricanes were raging in the Caribbean at the end of the season, but it was bitterly cold between Olivia and David. After that conversation, or rather, Olivia's monologue at the kitchen table, they hardly talked. When Olivia returned to work after the hurricane, Doug wanted to know what she had with David. Was he not aggressive? Doug asked. No, I think he was shocked, and of course he was hurt, she replied. He's not violent. Well, I thought I saw murder in his eyes, Doug claimed. No, he's just offended. I hurt him, Olivia said as she left. Doug was not a physically courageous man, and David's appearance belied his gentle nature. This was unlike Julie Stevenson's husband, Louis, whose short stature and fragile physique hid a short temper. Thanksgiving passed, and soon Christmas came, and with it the holiday party at the office. The event was small, only in one building, and without alcohol stimulation. Nevertheless, everything appeared, albeit for a short time. By that December, Doug had already slept with most of the most attractive women in GE Schenectady. None of the women complained. Only Olivia's conquest was unsuccessful, but the struggle was not over yet. Ever since her husband had appeared on that icy October day, Olivia had kept her distance from him. But over time, the situation began to look promising again. Doug managed to catch Olivia outside her office when the party started to break up. The next moment they were in her office with the door closed and began to kiss. I can't, she said, pulling away. Why? You said your husband wouldn't give us any trouble. It's still treason. I owe David more than that. And what do you owe to yourself? He said. Do you know what you want? You can't deny it. He pulled her into a tight embrace and kissed her. No matter how hard she tried to resist, she responded and put all the heat of her barely restrained passion into the kiss. It took all her willpower to break free. I'm sorry, she sobbed. And we don't have much time, said a frustrated Doug. What? I'm being transferred to the headquarters in New York. I'll be leaving at the end of January. This has not been announced yet. They won't officially announce it until the first of the new year, but I was told to prepare for the transfer. With that, he kissed her again, but Olivia continued to refuse him. On the way home, Olivia considered her situation. She wanted Doug, but not forever. His passing was a good thing, but she felt like she was missing something that wouldn't happen again. She loved her husband, David, and wanted to have a home and children with him. However, suddenly motherhood began to seem like a trap to her, which would close before she had time to feel life. Doug asked what she owed herself. Shouldn't she get some experience before she gets old? Would she really miss the chance to be with a man like Doug Chappell? If he left, she would miss her opportunity, and she knew that such a chance would not come again. By the time she pulled into her driveway, she had convinced herself that she needed to be with Doug at least once before he left for New York, but she wasn't going to cheat on her husband. She would talk to David and explain that she needed this one opportunity to experience something different. In a way, Doug's imminent departure makes it easier. It would only be once, and then he would leave, and she and David would be able to return to the comfortable life they had. But she would still have this experience. It was necessary to find the right moment to bring up the subject with David. She didn't want to talk about it as a fait accompli. This should arise in a discussion in which they could reach an understanding, a starting point to do exactly what she wanted. Of course, that's not how she saw it. They usually talked, and she got her way. Few marriages become truly equal. In most of them, one side dominates. The degree of dominance is precisely the cause of friction, but in the case of Olivia and David, she dominated, and there was almost no friction between them. So far, David has completely agreed on every issue in their marriage. However, Unfortunately, that's why Olivia's current desire was about to result in a growing earthquake. She decided that the best time to impress David with the fact of her desires would be right after dinner and before they retired to the bedroom. Olivia chose Sunday evening after a holiday party at the office. She made David's favorite roast for dinner. After dinner, I tried to tidy myself up while David was lying on the couch watching one of his nature shows. Around 9 o'clock, she slid next to him on the couch. He turned to her, catching a faint whiff of her Chanel perfume. Before he could speak, she kissed him on the lips and then said, "I want to talk about the problem between us." "A problem?" "About my attraction to Doug Chappell." "Is this Doug, Mr. Umbrella?" "Yes, there's a man in the parking lot," she said. "I'm attracted to him." "What does this mean?" "He wants me," she said and paused. "And I want him." She felt his body stiffen next to her, and then he pulled away. Unwilling to accept his refusal, she clung to him with her whole body. She put her head on his chest and took his hands in hers. "It won't change how I feel about you," she said. "I will always want you. It's just that right now, at this moment, I want him, and then only physically." David didn't like it. He gently pushed her away and held her at arm's length. In response, he made her look into his eyes. "And what are you trying to tell me? Did you sleep with him?" "Because that's not how a wife tells her husband, unless she confesses something." She smiled and looked into his eyes again. "I would never sleep with him," she began, "without telling you first." "So, what are you telling me now?" he asked. "I'm saying that I want to have this affair before we have children. We saved enough to have children, but we hesitated. We waited. I've been waiting, and now I understand why." "And why is that?" "I've never been with another man. I didn't know what it was. I was too controlled when I was young. I haven't experienced life. I was too busy studying to enjoy college or law school. I just want this one fling before we start living a good life, a wonderful marriage and with children. I only want one short meeting." "Do you want to have an affair with Mr. Umbrella?" he almost shouted. "No," she replied, "just one meeting. He gets a promotion and moves to the main office in New York. He leaves after the new year. I only want to spend a couple of days with him before he leaves. Weekends and nothing else." "And if I refuse?" David asked, even though he already knew the answer. "I was hoping that you would understand that I need this experience." She didn't give David a chance to respond, but kissed him and snuggled up to him. "Everything will be fine," she thought as they began their usual love dance. On his part, making love had a bittersweet tinge. Something was lost. She was the only woman he had ever known, and just a few minutes ago she was the only woman he expected to know intimately. Olivia decided that the matter was settled and told Doug that her first weekend in January would be his. Doug's house was on a quiet street in Niskayuna. For this area, the house was modest, 3-bedroom multi-level, in an area where colonial houses with 5 bedrooms and a hall in the center were preferred. As agreed, his attached garage was open in anticipation. Olivia parked her Audi next to Doug's Porsche. He was waiting for her in the living room with an open bottle of wine. For a moment, he was underneath her in the living room as she walked down from the garage to the main floor. He got a full look from a short black dress. She saw a mixture of lust and anticipation in his eyes. It was so different from the look her husband had given her when she left him just 20 minutes ago. David's eyes were sad. There was a pain in them that she would like to ease if she could, but she had told him that it would only be once, and then she would be his forever. They will have children together. If, thanks to love, their marriage manages to survive a small affair, it will be reliable. Their marriage can be considered strong. She told her husband about it because she sincerely believed in it herself. What she was going to do was an adventure and nothing more. She wanted to strengthen their marriage and, hopefully, her love for her husband. Something in her believed that she had already done the latter. Her body tingled with anticipation, from the tips of her fingers to the soles of her feet. Their bodies moved at the same time, as if attracted by an invisible force, and met in an embrace in the center of his living room. Doug kissed her, wrapping his arms around her, but pulled away and said, "One glass of wine, and then we'll go to dinner. I have tickets to the band's visit show at Proctor's Music Hall." Doug knew how to show appreciation for his conquest. Give her wine, treat her to dinner, and show her how to have a good time. He enjoyed his triumph and assured himself that he was giving as much as he was taking. "I'm all yours this weekend," Olivia assured him. They had dinner at a romantic Italian restaurant in the center of Schenectady and enjoyed a performance in a converted and renovated vaudeville theater. They drank quite a bit, but when he brought her to his house, he opened a bottle of champagne. They drank over the weekend together, and then went to the bedroom and began to satisfy the attraction that brought them together. He undressed her, as if unwrapping a priceless work of art, and told her how beautiful she was. He appreciated her in a way she had never experienced before. She felt as beautiful as he described her. Here with this most handsome of men, she would be able to think about him later. This moment was meant for her and her lover. They lay down in his double bed. It was only then that she remembered that they had not taken any additional precautions. She was still taking the pills, but she wasn't sure if she was happy about it or not. They had a weekend off, 2 more blissful days. Sunday came too early. They spent most of the weekend in bed. She was taken, as it seemed to her, in all possible ways. It was great, but she was already ready to go home and make up with David. Late Sunday night, they ordered Chinese takeaway, and after they ate, they made love one last time before she showered, packed her things, and changed into the short black dress she was wearing on Friday night. She left the house the same way she entered, through his garage. She got into the car and drove out through the open garage door, thus hiding from the curious neighbors. No one would say that she spent the weekend with Douglas. The most she could be accused of was being in public with him on Friday night. Soon he will leave for a promotion in New York, and she and her husband will work on the birth of a child. She was very happy with her life. 20 minutes later, Olivia parked her Audi in the driveway. The house was strangely dark. The porch lights were out, and she didn't see David's truck. "I decided that David had moved the truck to the garage." Opening the side door, she looked for Buster, who was supposed to welcome her back, but he was not on the threshold. She shouted, "I'm at home." I expected Buster to come running, but the dog didn't show up. She went into the kitchen, then into the living room. Both were empty. She shouted again, "David, I'm at home." There was no response, only silence. They must have gone for a late walk, she told herself. David must be in a bad mood. He always goes out with Buster late when he's in a bad mood. She went to the refrigerator for ice, and then poured herself a glass of whiskey. I checked the bottle to see if David had been drinking, but it was almost full. She sat down on the sofa in the living room and stretched out her legs and settled into a comfortable corner. She was very tired, but she knew she had to wait for David to return to show him that nothing had changed, except perhaps that her love for him had grown even stronger. From now on, he will be treated like the prince he is. Despite her good intentions, Olivia fell asleep. I woke up to the front doorbell ringing. The hallway is next to the living room, and the front doorbell can be really loud. Olivia was surprised to see daylight pouring through the windows. She must have fallen asleep. When she reached the front door, her mind told her that something was wrong. Buster. He didn't jump up and down near the door. Where's Buster? She thought sleepily. When she opened the door, she saw a tall woman whose hair was pulled back. She was wearing a cheap dark pantsuit. "To Olivia Taylor?" the woman asked. "Yes, how can I help you?" Olivia replied. "Mrs. David Taylor?" "Yes, what's the matter?" "I'm Detective Sylvia Marks," the woman announced, flashing a gold badge. "May I come in? I need to ask you a few questions." Olivia instinctively stepped back to let the detective enter, but then it dawned on her. "Oh no," Olivia exclaimed. "Is there really something wrong with David?" Detective Marks walked into the living room, where she turned and looked Olivia up and down. Olivia was still wearing the clothes she'd come home in the previous evening, the short black dress she'd worn to dinner with Doug. Olivia realized how unsuitable her dress was for early morning and felt exposed and embarrassed. "Not that I know of," the detective replied. "I'm here about Douglas Chappell." "Doug? I mean, Mr. Chappell? What about him?" Olivia felt out of place and confused, which was probably what the detective wanted. "He was attacked last night while taking out the trash in front of his house," the detective began, taking a small notebook out of her pocket. "He claims that he was attacked by a man in a ski mask and with a small baton." "Oh, my God. Are you here because you suspect David?" "Actually, no," Detective Marks said with a smile she couldn't suppress. The corners of her mouth turned up as she said, David Taylor has been excluded from the list of suspects. Although, I admit, under the circumstances, he was our first thought. Especially after Mr. Chappell informed us so quickly that he had spent the weekend with you. Detective Marks's smile turned into a slight grin. Olivia felt sick and wanted to sit on the couch, but in the end she just collapsed on it. Detective Marks followed her example and sat down on the edge of the upholstered chair opposite Olivia. Did you say that my husband is not a suspect? Olivia asked, her voice trembling a little. No, the manager and staff of the yacht club in Albany say that yesterday afternoon he launched his boat, Amor, and sailed south. Given the time of year, they decided it would be better to follow him on his VHF radio station, and were able to determine that at the time of the attack he was on Hudson River in the Poughkeepsie area. Pay boat? Olivia asked, beginning to regain some of her professional composure. Did he go out on his little sailboat on the river in January? Olivia finished incredulously. Detective Marks turned to her notebook. Turning the page, she said, the 12-meter Catalina, according to the yacht club manager. Obviously, he bought it in December and has been cooking for the last month. They say he is lucky that there is so little ice on the river this winter. They think he's heading south. Olivia jumped up and ran up the stairs. Everything was in its place in the bedroom until she looked closer and realized that some of David's things were gone. Little was taken from his closet, filled with work clothes, but the drawers of the chest of drawers turned out to be almost empty. However, it was on the dresser that she found his note, or rather, a greeting card, beautifully sealed in an envelope. The outside of the postcard read, I can't tell you how sorry I am. There was a small poem inside, but she only glanced at it briefly because he had left a handwritten note. Dear Olivia, I accepted a job in Florida at a small marine research institute. The position is only an entry-level position, but this is already the beginning. I'm sorry to leave, but I can't stay in this marriage anymore. And I think you were right when you said, we have to experience everything in life before we really settle down. I'm going to miss you, but I'm not sure I still love you. I took the money set aside for our children's fund and bought a boat that I can sail south and live there when I get to Florida. Do whatever you want with the house and the divorce. I hope you won't be angry and things will get better with that guy with the umbrella. Goodbye, David. Detective Marks heard Olivia's anguished cry and went upstairs to find out what was the matter. Finding Olivia kneeling on the bedroom floor, she helped the woman up and sit on the bed. Sylvia felt a little guilty as she sat Olivia down and asked if she could get the grieving woman a drink. Sylvia didn't like lawyers very much. In addition, Sylvia herself lost her husband to another woman and did not really sympathize with those who cheat on their spouse. However, now she was reacting like one abandoned woman towards another. Let me make you some tea, Sylvia suggested. No, I can handle it, Olivia replied. Let's go back to the living room and I'll answer your questions. Actually, the only question I have is whether you have ever seen Louis Stevenson during these last few days that you spent with Mr. Chappell. You mean my secretary Julie's husband? Yes, but I've never met him, and I have no idea what he looks like. I have a picture of him, the detective said, and handed Olivia a picture of a rude man. Looking at the photo, Olivia shuddered and said, I'm sorry. I've never seen him before. Oh well, it was just a possibility. The victim couldn't identify him, but I thought if he was following you both this weekend, you might have caught a glimpse of him. I didn't see him following us. Do you think he attacked Doug? Yes, he's a likely suspect, Sylvia began in a cool, professional voice. He has a criminal record for assault and a history of jealousy. As soon as your husband was expelled, he became the obvious choice. Of course, he has an alibi provided by a group of friends. I was hoping that you could combine it with the crime scene so that I could break his alibi. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. Is Doug going to be okay? He was beaten quite badly, especially on the genitals. He's in the hospital, but I'd wait a few days before visiting him. Olivia nodded as they walked down the stairs. I won't be able to see him for a day or two, Olivia said. I'm going to have to follow my husband and apologize to him. It might not be easy, Sylvia said. He's probably sailing under the George Washington Bridge right now. With that last comment, Detective Marks left the Taylor house. Detective Marks was wrong about one thing. By the time she left his former home, David Taylor and his dog Buster had passed the Statue of Liberty aboard the 12-meter yacht Amor and left New York Harbor. Then David turned to starboard and headed southeast, leaving New York astern and his marriage in the past.